The Time of the Ghost, Chapter 9. There was peace to think again. Sally, no, she was not Sally. She must be Imogen or Fenella, hung among the buzzing flies in the empty kitchen room, trying to consider some of the things she now knew. But, as before, her intelligence as a ghost seemed as limited as a narrow torch beam. What was outside of it hardly seemed to exist. The flies seemed to exist more, and the fading breakfast smells from beyond the green door. None of her sisters seemed to be awake yet. There was silence apart from the flies and a distant hum from school. Outside the window, the apple trees gusted and the hens pecked in one of those windswept hot grey days where every colour looks bleak and ordinary. It was ominous, as if the day was expecting something. From time to time, the windows were covered with blisters of fine rain. The ghost hung, trying to recapture some of the 7 years between now and the hospital. It was a time of fruitless mistakes. It had been dominated on one hand by himself, always angry, always but seldom there, and on the other hand by Julian Adiman, always laughing, always demanding more and more. Between them she'd scarcely been a person. At first she'd tried to please himself, and then she tried to please them both, until it was obvious that she could never please himself. He was just not interested enough. After that, she had devoted herself wholly to pleasing the demanding Julian Adiman. She had gone to art school, Cart had said. That seemed to be true. She had a fuzzy memory that Julian Adiman had decided on that. He said it made a good excuse to live near him in London. She could not live with him. He lived with his parents. But art school, what was that like? By turning the narrow beam of her attention on that as hard as she could, she recalled a time of being lost and ashamed. There were a host of brilliant painters and wildly good young artists who could all talk intelligently about what they were doing. She could not talk like that, and as an artist she knew she was stuck at what was good for a child, but rather feeble in a grown student. She was only there because of Julian Adiman. She wondered if she had become as dismal and discontented as the grown-up Sally. She feared she had. She had blamed Julian Adiman for it, but she had known it was her fault for letting Julian Adiman take her over like this. And she had decided to break with him. She knew she had to, if she was ever to do anything of her own accord. But she was afraid to do it. Julian Adiman had outbursts of frightening violence if she did anything he did not want. That was how he came to fling her out of his car. He was going to South Africa. His father had found him a job there. His father found him everything, even the car he'd thrown her out of. Julian Adiman had wanted her to go to South Africa with him, to drop everything and go, and she knew this was the time when she had to say no. There were 1,000 reasons, particularly the fact that South Africa was the kind of country it was, and she had put off saying no because she was so frightened of him, until they were driving along in his car. Then she'd clenched her hands and teeth in her courage and said no, and Julian Adiman had reacted with more than his usual violence. She was interrupted by Oliver. Oliver came stumbling sleepily out of the living room and uttered a faint far-off rumble on finding that she was still there. But he was used to her now. She was one of his family after all. She could make herself useful and let him out for his morning airing. Accordingly, Oliver rolled his mottled donkey-sized bulk to the back door and stood with his head pointed at it patiently. When she did nothing, he uttered a few squeaks, like the whistle of a distant referee, and continued to stand patient and pointed. "It's no good," she said. "I can't open doors in this state." Oliver did not believe her. He put his nose to the crack where the door closed and blew meaningly. When that failed, he sighed, raised a massive 3-clawed foot and hit the door with it. The door leapt about. Oliver waited, looked over his shoulder at her and did it again. "Stop it," she said. "I told you I can't." Oliver, however, went on hitting the door, and the door went on leaping and shaking the whole building. 5 repetitions of this treatment brought Fenella tramping half awake downstairs in her grey nylon nightwear. "Oh," said Fenella, "the ghost is back again. Stupid dog. Ghosts can't open doors." She opened the door and Oliver rolled majestically forth. The ghost went with him for no real reason except that Cart had been anxious about him. She followed while he ambled forth among the hens and sketchily raised a hind leg against the hut that held Monaghan. She followed again when he walked round the buildings and emerged in the wide bleak green of the playing fields. Here Oliver went on the longest walk he ever permitted himself, to the other side of the field, almost as far as the dead elms. She did not follow. She hung by the school, watching the soggy, shaggy shape, large even at that distance, ambling and prying among the hedge bottoms there. She could feel Monaghan out there. Monaghan was waiting, gloating and dwelling in triumph. Last night, Sally and Julian Adamon had brought Monaghan more life than she'd had for centuries, and now the ghost could feel that life in each fleeting dry shower of rain and in each sour scudding patch of sunlight. 7 years away, Cart might have said she invented Monaghan, but that was not true. The school had once been a place called Mangum Manor, and Cart had taken the name from that out of a mispronunciation that Fenella once made. But who was to say that Cart had not taken the name of a real being, either by accident or because that being made her take it? No, Monaghan was terribly real. Suddenly terrified, the ghost knew that the only way she could hang on to her little patch of existence, a white patch, 7 years away, the size of a hospital bed, was by keeping near to people. People could keep Monaghan away. People could stop Monaghan moving in and taking her, if only they had long enough to understand in. How long had she to make them understand? 7 years in the future, it had been, say, 3 in the afternoon? What was the time here? It was later than the soporific state of her sisters suggested. She could tell by the hum from the red brick building that it was lesson time. 10 o'clock? Confirming this, the school began to strike. Heavily it toiled off 10. Then she had 9 hours here until 7 o'clock that evening. It was not much time. The ghosts fled back to their private quarters. Quick, wake them up. Get them to understand. She arrived back with Oliver and was let in by Imogen this time. Imogen and Fenella were getting up. Imogen looked tousled and unwell, and the yellow trouser suit became her less than ever. Fenella was tousled too. The knots jutted at the sides of her face, and her green sack hung unevenly. She stood in the middle of the littered living room and boomed to Imogen. Oliver's feet are killing him, and the ghost is back again. How do you know? Imogen called from the kitchen. I just know, boomed Fenella. From Cart up above in the bedroom came a wordless snarl of rage. It was like a wild animal. Both her sisters and the ghost with them stopped dead where they were and stared nervously at the ceiling. There was an angry rattle of bed springs from above, but no further noise. Fenella tiptoed into the kitchen. I think she ought to get up and look after Oliver at least, she muttered to Imogen. Shh, said Imogen, staring at the ceiling with half a loaf clutched anxiously to her chest. They remained like that for a good minute. When it seemed clear there was going to be no further sound from Cart, Imogen whispered glumly. There weren't any cornflakes left. Let's go and get some, said Fenella. Remembering that Mrs. Gill could see her, the ghost went with them, pushing through the green door and thumping through the silver one into the white breakfast-scented school kitchen. There was not much going on. The 2 other white-coated ladies were sitting face to face at the white-topped table eating cornflakes. Looking at them now with the eyes of someone 7 years in the future, the ghost saw that one was an elderly nonity, and the other was a girl not much older than Cart. This girl had asserted her grown-upness by dyeing her hair a deep and improbable black. Mrs. Gill was the one who mattered here. Mrs. Gill was sitting at the table with her back to the door. Her hair, at this stage in her life, was a kind of peppery brown. As the door thumped, her peppery head turned, bringing into view her peaked side face and the cigarette curving from her upper lip. Get out of my kitchen, she said. Fenella simply stumped toward the table and removed the packet of cornflakes from it. All 3 ladies stared unlovingly, but none of them said anything until Imogen came up too. Imogen, with a nervous duck of her head and a silly polite smile, picked up the jug of milk from the kitchen table and started to carry it away. It was clear that Fenella's brazen approach was the right one. There was something about Imogen's apologetic manner which invited trouble, and all 3 ladies reacted. Hey, said the young one, you just put that back. You've got no right, said the old one. Coming in here, said Mrs. Gill, passing smoothly into a tirade from a standing start, without so much as a word, and walking off with half the food in the place. Sponges, that's what you are. When I was your age, as I was out at work. It's time you girls learnt to look after yourselves and stopped coming pinching things in my kitchen. We are trying to look after ourselves, Imogen pointed out humbly. Mrs. Gill flung around in her chair. The cigarette wagged fiercely. Well, you better try harder than this. I've had about enough of you girls coming in here and walking off with things. I'm going to speak to your mother about it. The cigarette wagged on, and with it went Mrs. Gill's voice. shrilling and skirling. The tirade was so familiar that no one needed to listen properly. Hopefully the ghost put herself where Mrs. Gill could see her. Mrs. Gill certainly saw her. Her face turned to the ghost, to Imogen, to Fenella, and the cigarette wagged fiercely her way, every third sentence like a punctuation mark. But Mrs. Gill had evidently decided that her strange appearance was intended to annoy, and just one more crossed the bear. "You and your silly tricks!" The cigarette wagged at her. "I've had enough!" It wagged at Imogen and at Fenella. "So I'm going to your mother this minute." Mrs. Gill seemed to mean this. She started to get up from her chair. Fenella spoke. "Go if you like," she said carelessly, "and I shall go and tell her all the things you take away in your green and orange bag." Mrs. Gill's face became utterly still. It was hard, peaky and red, and her eyes stared into Fenella's venomously. "I see," she said. "Right." She turned back to her thick cup of coffee on the table. "You do one more thing, my girl," she said, and then she said no more. She picked up her cup. The other ladies went back to eating cornflakes. Fenella and Imogen might have been ghosts too, for all the notice anyone took of them. Quietly and hurriedly they retreated to the door and backed out, clutching the milk and the cornflakes. "I wish you hadn't said that," Imogen whispered when they were outside the passage. "So do I," said Fenella, "but I had to, or she'd have gone to Phyllis." "But we've got a right to food," Imogen said wretchedly. "What else can we do? Do you think Phyllis would give us the money to buy cornflakes of our own?" "No," said Fenella. They arrived back in the kitchen. That was their own kitchen, where Fenella first poured a large heap of cornflakes and milk in a bowl for Oliver, and then another without milk but even larger into a bowl for herself, and she sat down to eat them dry. "Have some milk?" Imogen said hopelessly with a jug in her hand. "No," said Fenella. "Milk makes them all soggy." "Milk is good for you," Imogen observed, pouring milk on her own cornflakes. "I never eat things that are good for me," said Fenella. There was a silence except for the sound of 3 mouths eating cornflakes. In it the ghost hung, wondering what to do. She saw that she'd been silly to expect Mrs. Gill to notice her, for Mrs. Gill would have mentioned in the hospital if she'd understood. According to Carr, it was her sisters who seemed to understand, so how had she attracted their attention? "One of them must be me," she said. She looked at Imogen. Imogen was spooning up cornflakes fast and desolately. A tear was working down one of her cheeks. Mrs. Gill had started her grieving again, and that meant she was not likely to notice anything else. Fenella, then? Fenella knew she was there. Maybe that was just because they were the same person. The ghost floated nearer, just beside Fenella's bony shoulder and sharp munching jaw. "Fenella," she said, "I think I may be your ghost." Nothing came of it because overhead, Cart came to life again. She came with a scream which modulated to a roar and then became a scream again, without ever once sounding like a human voice. "Will you stop all that horrible crunching?" All jaws stopped, even Oliver's. All attention was on the ceiling. "How can a person sleep?" screamed Cart, "in all this din?" Fenella gave Imogen a deeply expressive look and raised her voice in return. "It's after 10, she boomed. "We're having breakfast." "Well, stop it at once," howled Cart, "or I'll come down and kill you." She meant this, it was very clear to everyone. Oliver lay down beside his bowl with a sigh. Imogen and Fenella looked at one another. "No one can eat cornflakes quietly," Imogen breathed. "Even soggy ones," Fenella whispered grimly. "And stop that bloody whispering!" yelled Cart. Imogen and Fenella looked at one another again, united in loathing for Cart. The ghost did not blame them. She'd been thinking kindly of Cart, too kindly, she knew. Maybe the grown-up Cart deserved this kindness, but this Cart did not. She had forgotten what Cart was like in the morning, and not just this morning, but every morning. And there was worse to come, she knew. Imogen bowed her head and gripped the edge of her table, mustering courage. "I shouldn't," Fenella said warningly, but Imogen took no notice. It was something she did every morning. She never seemed to learn. Having made herself as brave as she could, she got up silently and tiptoed gently, gently through the living room. She stopped at the foot of the stairs, where she cocked her head sideways and adjusted a sweet smile on her face. She was seeing herself as a ministering angel. She needed to in the circumstances. "Cart, dear," Imogen cooed gently up the stairs. "Shall I bring you up some coffee?" A terrible growl was the answer, and Imogen flinched. Oliver, at his fiercest, sounded like a lamb in comparison. "I'll put the kettle on, shall I, Cart dear?" Imogen said. It was more of a quiver than a coo. "Oh, shut up!" snarled the thick animal voice upstairs. "When you start being tactful, you really get up my nose." "Cart dear," Imogen began again unwisely. "Ah!" went Cart. There was a surging sound and a heavy bump that shook the ceiling. Imogen went pale. Her ministering attitude somehow became that of someone poised on one foot ready to run, and with reason. The ceiling vibrated, the stairs shook. Cart appeared with unbelievable speed, wild-haired, white-faced and snarling, and she dived down the stairs without apparently treading on any of them. The ghost caught a whirling glimpse of bared teeth and swollen eyelids with little piggy eyes glaring between them, and she found herself crouching on top of the piano. Imogen took a running dive and vanished into the space between the piano and the sofa. By the time Cart hit the living room floor with a crash that shook the whole building, the room was apparently empty. "Ah!" snarled Cart, glaring pig-eyed. She made for the kitchen in huge strides. There was a crash, a yelp from Oliver, and the sound of big bodies falling about. Fenella bolted around the door, running on hands and knees like a spidery monkey to come and join Imogen behind the sofa. "I told you not to," she whispered. "Come out, you cowardly little creeps!" Cart bawled. There was a series of awesome bangs. "What's she doing?" Imogen whispered as Oliver too crept into the living room. His blurry tail was wedged between his great hind legs and he was shivering. "Breaking another chair, I think," said Fenella, and she sighed. Sure enough, the bangs became splintering noises and the sound of pieces of wood clattering on the stone floor. All the same, Cart's growls showed signs of becoming slightly less animal. Once, there was even a gasp of a human voice with a splinter up its thumbnail. This was followed by a thick human voice swearing, and this in turn was followed by a last clatter, then silence. Eventually there came the sound of cornflakes pattering into a bowl. Imogen relaxed a little, and she dared to sit up. "Cart's blood sugar is low in the mornings," she explained to Fenella. "Is that what it's called?" said Fenella. "I thought it was a bad temper." They sat side by side on the floor, listening to the sounds of an ape woman chomping cornflakes in the next room, and the ghost descended to them. "Fenella, you know I'm here. Please help. I've only got 6.5 hours left now." Unfortunately, Imogen spoke at the same moment. "Fenella," she said, "what am I going to do? I can't do my practice without going through there." She pointed to the kitchen door. Fenella spoke to Imogen. She did not hear the ghost. "You should wait an hour until she's human," she said. "But they'll be using the music rooms in an hour," Imogen wailed. "I'll be turned out again." "Shut up!" Cart growled from the kitchen. "Let me have breakfast in peace." Imogen and Fenella shut up. They were forced to hold the rest of their conversation in signs, which left them no attention for a ghost. "Oh, all right," Imogen whispered dismally at length. "Everything's horrible anyway, but I bet she'll kill me." "I'll guard you, I promise," Fenella whispered back. Sighing, Imogen scrambled to her feet and pulled the legs of her trouser suit out from under her shoes. She began gloomily clearing away the picture, the papers, and the jar of paint water from the yellow keys of the old piano, and dusting it with the front of her suit. The suit was big enough for Imogen to take a bunch of it and use it as a cloth without even leaning forward. Fenella, meanwhile, dragged an armchair in front of the kitchen doorway and took up a post, cross-legged on the back of it. She made signs to show that Cart was now reading a book. Imogen nodded and arranged the music on the yellow stand. Then she arranged herself on the frayed and wobbly stool and sat staring at the music. "It's okay," Fenella whispered encouragingly. "Get on." But Imogen seemed to be in the grip of a gloomy apprehension. She just sat. The ghost did not blame her. Knowing what Cart was like, she tried to use the silence to catch their attention. "Imogen! Fenella!" she screamed. "Help me!" It felt as if it ought to be as loud as the roars of Cart, but even she could tell it made no sound at all, and she stopped despairingly. "This is going to be excruciating," Imogen murmured. "Well, it's a crucial piano," Fenella murmured back. "I didn't mean that," said Imogen. She sighed. Her face was bloated with misery, and she put both her hands to the yellow keyboard and began to play. The ghost listened, rather amazed. It was a piece of music which the ghost knew as well as Imogen evidently did. Imogen did not bother to look at the music. Her elbows were stiff and her head slightly bent, and she seemed to be attending to something away beyond the music. Maybe she was waiting for the cart to erupt again, but there was more wrong than that. The ghost had always thought of that particular piece as a soaring electric rumble with a tune edging sideways from the rumble. True, Imogen was playing it on a cheap old piano, which was rather out of tune, but she was playing it like a machine, and the music was simply a collection of notes. "Oh, come on, Imogen," she said without meaning to. "You can do better than that." "No, I can't," Imogen answered as she played without looking round. "I think I hate it." Imogen had heard her. It must be because Imogen was playing and not really attending, terribly excited, and trying not to let the excitement show and distract Imogen. The ghost said, "You must have been on this piece too long then." That seemed likely considering how well they both seemed to know it. "Only a fortnight," Imogen said gloomily. "Well then," said the ghost, "try something else you like better, and while you're playing, listen to something It's not that," Imogen interrupted irritably, rattling notes off like a pianola. "I have a brilliant memory for music, I don't deny that, but—" "Shut up!" Cart bawled from the doorway. A book heavily thrown caught Fenella in the stomach and knocked her backwards off the chair. Cart followed up the book with a packet of cornflakes. It hit Imogen on the head and burst all over her. Cornflakes whirled in the air and pattered down on the piano keys. "Take that," Cart said, "for making a horrible noise. I told you to be quiet." Imogen turned, and with immense dignity, a cornflake, lodged in a tear, slid down one of her cheeks. While it slid, Imogen examined Cart's glaring face for signs of humanity. She seemed to decide that Cart was joining the human race by now. "I have to practice," she said. "Yes, but you don't have to babble to yourself like a lunatic while you do," Cart snarled, and she breathed heavily and threateningly through her nose like a bull ready to toss somebody. "I shall talk if I like," retorted Imogen, "and you've wasted all the new cornflakes. Clear them up." "You made me do it. Clear them up yourself," said Cart. "And you've murdered me," Fenella boomed, crawling out from beyond the armchair. She knelt up, holding her stomach. "When I die, my ghost will come back and haunt you." By this time, all three of them were shouting at once. Imogen was keeping time to her shouts by banging her hand down on the piano. The noise was horrible. Jangle, crash, scream. The ghost quivered among the yells and the discords. She was very shaken. Not by the quarrel, she was used to those, but by the way she'd known that music Imogen was playing so well. It ought to mean she was Imogen. But if she was Imogen, why on earth had she gone to art school? Everybody knew Imogen was going to be a concert pianist. And then Fenella had thrown it all in doubt by threatening to come back and haunt Cart. Fenella had meant that, and here now she was, as a ghost. "Oh, how shall I find out?" she wailed to herself, moving away backwards from the noise. It was a great relief to hear the screams getting fainter and fainter, but this was not helping her attract their attention. She was getting too far away. She could see a monstrous mummified leg again, and as the narrow torch beam of her attention turned back to the hospital, it caught a memory of a grey crisp paper with words swimming onto it. "Ontario. Howard in the hedge."